I'm recording this video very late, so I will have to heavily rely on my notes. So apologies for looking the other way, but it is very heavy on my heart to talk about this subject. I feel if I don't, who will? So I love the USA. I love Americans. I only speak for myself, but there's a time and place for citizens to engage citizens. In a democracy, the power belongs to the people. Leaders aren't rulers. Power doesn't come somehow from within them. They're only vested with it. We elect representatives, and we also keep our own voices. And while I don't intend to comment on your domestic politics, those are your choices and your consequences under the aegis of democracy. Still, there's an aspect of America's current direction that affects us all abroad. Look, I lead a small life. I work for a US-based company, live in Europe, and hold a master's in international relations. I chose not to pursue that field professionally, and frankly, I dislike most of the noise surrounding international affairs. But still, I feel the weight of responsibility to speak up on an issue now for the first time. So here are a few thoughts, without appeals to authority, laid out for you to evaluate on your own. Right now, there's plenty of logic in looking for answers in geopolitics. I understand the challenges tied to the dollar. It isn't infinitely flexible. Compared to China's control over its own currency, the dollar system can feel like a constraint. Maybe it's no longer the best foundation for the global economy. Maybe it is. Questioning it is legitimate. What I fear, though, are two things: tariffs tanking the West and the unraveling of alliances. On tariffs, modern tariffs are relics. Their philosophical roots go back to mercantilism, a system where wealth was fixed and nations feared buying more than they sold, a system that got its earliest start before America was discovered. It made sense in a world without growth, but we no longer live in that world. GDP growth figures come and go annually as a fact of life. However, in reality, there's nothing natural about it. The United States has the largest, most powerful domestic market in the world. A trade deficit is somewhat predictable, and there's some good reason for it. Being dominant means being able to buy more than others. And with the dollar as the reserve currency, imports get cheaper, while exports become harder to sell. Of course, it goes into a billion little causes, but it's just impossible to ignore that with the purchasing power of the US economy, there's not enough buyers in the world to even the scales. In the pre-industrial age, the global economy was stagnant. One country's gain was another's loss. Now, people can start businesses and nations maximize their wealth when they trade more. Innovation, mass production, scale, these generate value. Trade deals, especially free trade agreements, are about gains now and gains in the future. Think about it. Mutually advantageous collaboration makes for future business. It's literally a tree that keeps giving. Tariffs, on the other hand, are a race to the bottom, bleeding out the other, vying for my market before I would bleed out. We live in a world of constantly emerging goods, services, and entire new categories of both. It's never been easier for a single worker's output to reach thousands. In this system, growth has its place. There's breathing room. There's all sorts of avenues. With tariffs, not so much. They reduce access, slow production, raise prices, and isolate innovation. They make everyone poorer when everything is aligned for shared gain. And yes, national debt is real. And yes, the instinct to grab tools, any tools, is understandable. The unfortunate thing is, tariffs don't address debt. They don't bring back manufacturing in any comprehensive sense. What they do is provoke retaliation, punish domestic buyers, and offer global leadership on sale to the highest bidder. And remember, America created the modern economic order. And sure enough, it made sense at the time. It's only natural that times have changed. Now it could be America again that proposes the next system, one fairer, more stable. Tariffs, however, are the opposite of that. They are more like a skip this turn card, a self-inflicted punishment. Over time, sure, a tariff regime could rebuild domestic supply chains, but the cost would be steep. The world would move on without you. Trade would flow around the US and new powers would rise. Someone else would write the rules. Someone else would take the lead. And now on alliances. Using tariffs as a bargaining chip to force deals may sound clever in a vacuum, but the US already held the strongest hand. Europe was your oyster. Punishing partners is in fact discarding your leverage. Take the claim that the EU has stolen from the US in trade. The EU protects some inefficient industries for cultural and social reasons. It is understood by economists to not be to gain an advantage, but to preserve identity. The US has consistently chosen efficiency. It accepted disruption in exchange for growth. In that context, the EU has mostly been robbing itself. Look at it now. Growth slowing, Germany slipping into recession. That's not the result of theft, at least not any successful theft. And still, I understand the appeal of economic independence, food, manufacturing, resilience, these matter. But even then, these are very arbitrary choices. You could pick any number of important necessities and claim they are in danger. I am not convinced about the advantage of taking a turn toward manufacturing as opposed to higher value adds. Of course, capacities can be important in conflicts and in tilting the playing field when dealing with manufacturing-heavy partners, but it is going to demand a lot of sacrifices to undercut China and Vietnam and the rest of the powerhouses. Sacrifices from the average Joe, from households, and what matters to me, it seems that your allies in Europe, us, who also aren't exactly the most competitive in manufacturing, should be punished. Too often we hear false comparisons. Run the country like a business. Make decisions like you would for your family. But nations aren't families. They aren't corporations. They are nations with different obligations, different tools, and different consequences. What's especially scary in these false analogies is nations don't have any sort of safety net for defaults or poor decisions that companies or families have, and we all know even those are fragile in that way. We owe each other the honesty to recognize that. And now to my truly deepest concern, the breaking up of alliances. Freeloaders. That word was used to describe Europe recently. I've thought a lot about it. It's true that European military spending has lagged, but the idea that Europe is weak, passive, or unwilling to stand up, it's so incredibly dangerous. The EU was born as an answer to a continent soaked in war. Before 1945, Europe was a battleground of perpetual conflict. After the Second World War, a few great men imagined something else, a shared peace secured by cooperation and integration, and it worked, if you can believe it. One of the unlikeliest outcomes in history. But that peace is not irreversible. It's not ingrained in the genes of Europeans. In fact, fathers would happily send their children to certain death if that served the cause of regaining some tiny plot of land their country laid claim to some 200 years ago. It's true. Even today, old hatreds run deep and fester. Peace is maintained vigilantly, and the people are constantly occupied with the business of a Europe that's better off for cooperation. Still, the instinct toward war never died. Break the bonds that hold Europe together and you get chaos. You get the old Europe back, fractious, armed, tribal, and proud. Not exactly exploitable either, just reckless. A stable, responsible EU is a priceless partner. And let's remember who made that possible. The US did. Reconstruction after the war, you guys made that possible. Unraveling it now means unraveling your own investment, your own achievement, and alliances themselves. This whole idea of coordinated peace, mutual prosperity, shared values, this is a Western invention. Most of the world doesn't have it, and they're worse off for it. And I'm not saying that to insult anyone. I'm saying it because it's true. No country would be worse for having the kind of alliances the West has built. Which brings me to the last point. We've seen this logic before. When the US floated the idea of buying Greenland from Denmark, it is realpolitik, something not quite American, and it is also an echo of something ancient. In Thucydides' Melian dialogue, Athens famously tells the neutral Melians, "The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must." The Melians appeal to principle, to justice, to alliances. Athens responds with force. That encounter ends in massacre. But the war didn't end there. Eventually, it was Athens that lost, and make no mistake, not because it lacked force, but because its rival, Sparta, leaned on alliances and patience instead of dominance and coercion. Milos was one tragic story, sure, a victim, but also Athens, the imperial power, eventually destroyed itself, a victim all the more. So I suppose what I'm trying to do is appeal to your heritage. The United States of America has been the global champion of freedom and peace. You've sacrificed dearly, but always with your eyes on the good. Where is that legacy now? The US of history didn't break alliances, it didn't stand in the way of freedom, it didn't punish allies, it didn't tolerate festering violence. I love the US. Not just for what it is, but for what it's tried to be through all its history. Please hold on to your leadership role. Please be the voice of peace again.